Welcome to this Killick Explains video. This week, how to spend money well. And what I mean by well is in a way that hopefully brings you the most satisfaction. And we're going to talk about spending small amounts rather than large amounts. So these are rules of thumb for everybody, regardless of your income or asset level. So a bit of background first of all, as usual, to kick off. Essentially, there's lots of advice around about how to save money. All the time you're bombarded with lots of advice, usually good advice about saving, why it's important and how to do it. But there's actually quite a bit less around on how to spend it. And obviously, that's the flip side of the coin. Many of us spend all our working careers saving money. And actually giving a little bit of thought to spending is quite important because happiness is a function of, yes, building a pot, being secure, having choice, but then also actually enjoying the money you've built up. And here are some, therefore, what I call golden rules. And at the end, I'll give you a source for some further reading. Okay, rule number one, little and often. Now, some of these sound like cliches, but actually they're quite important rules when it comes to maximising the enjoyment you get from the money that you've worked hard to gather. So what I mean by that is big spending, big one-off purchases they don't always, but they can result in what's called post-purchase dissatisfaction. Now, to give this a bit of technical jargon, psychologists refer to this as hedonic adaptation, which basically means you get an initial thrill from buying something large, whether that be a new car, if you're fortunate enough, a property, all right, it could be a one-off treat, but basically that fades fairly quickly. And here's a quick question as a test. Now, there's no right answer to this question. Just want to stress that, but it's well worth thinking through what you would respond. So, what would make you happiest? 3 choices coming up. Number 1, spending £20,000 on a new car. Now, some of you might be thinking, absolutely, if I had £20,000, that would make me happy. But psychologists reckon not for very long, and certainly not as long as you might think. So the alternative might be spending £20,000 instead on 200 treats worth £100. Now, those treats could be meals out, clothes, etc. But there is some evidence that that gives a more drip-fed enjoyment approach to spending, or you could compromise and spend, say, half as much on the car and then buy 100 treats. And what psychologists reckon, and you'll know this in your heart of hearts, is that whilst on the left, the initial splurge gives you a bit of a kicker of satisfaction, actually, the amount of enjoyment you get from that big purchase can gradually erode over time. Whereas smaller purchases give you that same little kick as you spend the money. So worth thinking about, little and often, as a way of boosting the amount of enjoyment you get from the money that you've worked hard to earn and save. Number 2, book it. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, basically, we can get as much pleasure, again, there are studies that prove this, and you probably know it to be true without a study, from the anticipation of something enjoyable, whether that be a meal out, a holiday, I don't know, a hot air balloon ride, whatever you're allowed to do in lockdown these days, and it's probably a shrinking list again. But anticipation is almost as good as the actual event. Alain de Botton's written about that in terms of travel. Almost planning a trip is better than actually doing it. So build in the anticipation. Make your brain run the way it wants to on this one, so get organised and book ahead. Don't leave everything for the last minute. I mean, surprises are good, but get organised, put things in the diary, get that meal out organised if your local area allows you to do it at the moment, and so on. Number 3, mix it up. Now, we are creatures of habit. I'm the same. But lockdown has sometimes left, well, me in particular, feeling like I'm in Groundhog Day, the movie. You know, days merge into each other. There's a limit on what you can actually do socially. A lot of us have been working from home as well as in studios like this, so things can get a bit samey. And repeating the same treat too often can basically diminish its power to satisfy. So mix it up. Simple thing. Don't always give the same gifts to people. Don't always buy the same coffee from the same place. And mix up the time you have your end of day wind down drink, and also mix up what it is. And that, psychologists reckon, will give you a little bit more of a pleasure burst from each pound of spending. 4th, buy time if you can. Now, essentially what we're saying here is, as Charles Franklin put it, no one gets out of here alive. So time is at least as important as money, and money can be used to buy time. What I mean by that is play to your strengths. So think about ways that you can buy time. So if you can afford a cleaner, why not have a cleaner? All right, why not give someone else a job? Why not give yourself a break from that particular chore? If you're on holiday and you fancy a day with your other half without the kids, why not pay for that holiday nanny? She'll be happy to be employed, you'll be happy to have the time off. And some people are nervous about this. No, I do everything myself, I don't pay other people. My own mother says, I'm not going to take a taxi, that's wasteful. Well, it's not that wasteful from the taxi driver's point of view, because for them it's a job, and for her it saves her the stress and the hassle of running a car. So buy time. And finally, share it around. Now you might think I'm being slightly patronising here, but actually this is important and people lose sight of this one. Basically, giving can be more pleasurable than receiving, and that's a lesson that young people generally need to learn one way or another. As young folk making your way through the world, it can be a little bit tempting to always want stuff, but actually giving time as well as objects can be just as satisfying, if not more so. Social signalling is definitely a losing game. That's where people accumulate assets simply to be able to show the Joneses, as it were, that they've got considerably more than they have. That's a losing game, because there'll always be someone else who's got more than you. All right. There was a famous hedge fund festival, Hedgestock, when it ran, where there was a counselling tent for people who'd only made $10 million that year and were disappointed not to be at the top table, believe it or not, where an annual income of more like $100 million was needed. Now, if you can imagine being depressed at only making $10 million a year, you can see the danger of regarding money as a tool for simply social signalling. Someone else will signal that you've got less back. So, be creative with your spending. The thought really does count. I know that's a cliche, but people often appreciate the fact you've given some thought to what you're buying as much as they do the value of the thing you've bought. So there you have it. 5 seemingly simple rules, ways to squeeze more enjoyment from the money that you save and earn. If you'd like to know more, well, I've written about this in the latest issue of Confidant. That's the autumn 2020 issue. So do ping me for a copy of that one, or go to our website. Then there's Jonathan Clements at humbledollar.com. He's written articles around this topic, so do explore that avenue. And of course, there's the usual email address, editor@killick.com. And finally, a mention of the video library. If you'd like to watch videos on this topic and some other ones, especially around how to save money, then it's killick.com/learn.